Okay.
And we've come to many of these professional development sessions, thanks to Zoom during
Yes.
COVID.
I know.
Terrific saving grace,
But
now in person.
my preference is always in person,
It is.
live.
It
You
is.
can have better discussion and
It's
make
more.
a more personal connection.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I agree. But I'm very happy that Jamie can teleport in today.
Yeah.
Things we would not have thought was possible
Yeah.
20 years ago.
So are you ready for us to begin?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can go ahead and start.
Is our live audience ready for us to begin?
We're as live as it gets.
All right. So Jamie, I'll let you get us started.
Okay, great. And I guess you or somebody can be controlling the slides. That would be
Yes.
helpful.
I think I have a thing.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So hello, everybody. It is great to see so many familiar faces, and I always enjoy the opportunity to return, even if just virtually, to EKU and spend a little bit of time on various topics for the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. So I am Jamie Shaffer, formerly worked at EKU in teaching and learning, and now I'm in faculty affairs and professional development at the Thomas F. Frist College of Medicine at Belmont University. And I will let my colleague and co-presenter introduce herself.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. I'm Amanda Green. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at EKU and the program coordinator for anthropology as well. So I can go ahead and get started.
Excellent. So the way that we're going to structure our presentation today is we have some brief introductory material, and then each of us are going to share how we have used course preparation assignments in our respective classes. And I do want to note that we may go back and forth between saying course preparation assignments or class preparation assignments, and those are the same thing. So we're using them interchangeably today. So the goals for our session today, we are going to describe the purpose and the benefits of using course preparation assignments. We'll talk a little bit about how you can structure and use CPAs to increase engagement, both in in-person and online courses. And we will hopefully provide the content and basis for you to be able to design effective CPAs for use in your own courses as well. So what is a course preparation assignment? There are multiple definitions that are kind of floating around out there, but basically, as we are discussing them, they're a low stakes writing assignment. And the purpose of these low stakes writing assignment is to allow students to practice concepts prior to having to use them in high stakes environments or in class environments. So CPAs can help encourage critical reading, help encourage closer examination of content. It can provide some guide for students when you have a large amount of reading. It can be intimidating, so CPAs can help guide them in the right direction of what it is that you're wanting them to learn and to take away from the material. They can help prepare students better for class, and I know that's a very, very common concern is, how do we get students to come to class prepared? And we're seeing students come more and more often not having done preparation reading and preparation work. So how can we encourage them to do that? And CPAs can help with that. They can also serve as a great resource for in-class discussions and activities when students are able to be exposed to concepts in advance and then utilize them inside the classroom that can help reinforce the concepts that they're learning. And then it gives them a safe space to practice where they can make mistakes and go through the process of learning and not understanding something and gradually coming to understand it better without having to be so concerned about grades and things like that. So some of the research on CPAs, we have found that CPAs can, in fact, heighten the time that students spend preparing. And we'll talk a little bit later about some in-class assessments that we've done that support that research as well. It can give them a heightened sense of preparedness. So when they come into the class, they feel more confident in participating. It can encourage them to work with relevant concepts in active ways before they even get to class. So depending on how they're structured, students can have an opportunity to grapple with ideas, to be a little bit daring in some of the concepts and assertions that they make, and really think about it critically before they even arrive on the day in the classroom. And it can really help foster student engagement and allow instructors to spend a lot more time facilitating inactive discussion, inactive activity, rather than having to lecture and cover all of the content for the first time with your students. So it really can promote that active learning environment, but also allow our students to get exposed to some of the typical content that we cover in didactic lectures. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Green, who will share a little bit about how she has used CPAs in her courses.
Thank you, Jamie. So I start with the provocative question: can students participate in learning without engaging with their course materials? Can they do it without reading? And I asked this question because when I began at EKU some 6 years ago, my best student came up to me at the end of class and told, after a class of really heavy group-based discussion, and she told me that none of her group members ever did the reading, and most of their discussions were really surface level and not really in depth like I was aiming for. And so I had my moment of reconciling how I was teaching, and I decided to do it differently. So this is part of our earlier QEP on critical reading. I worked with Lisa and Jill to learn how to encourage reading, and CPAs were the tactic that I came away with best from that process. So this is for Anthropology 120, Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. That's the course I teach most, 2 to 4 sections every semester. So the basic structures of my CPAs, I'm going to start with what does a CPA look like? I have an introduction to concepts. So I introduce students to what they are going to be focusing on that week, and I structure my CPAs by week and the topics therein. I give them the objectives. What do I want them to get from this CPA? And then I give them very specific assignment directions. Do this, do that, answer this question, etc. And I will show you an example. It has lots of text on it. At the very top, it says CPA number 4, my kinship chart. So I introduce students first to the concept of kinship in that first paragraph. Kinship describes the culturally recognized ties between members of a family, etc. So if students only read this first paragraph, they are going to come away with at least a cursory understanding of kinship, according to anthropology. Then below that, I have the objectives: to apply the concept of kinship charts to your own family or a family of your choice, to learn about your own family or a family of your choice through anthropology, thinking critically about the role of kinship in our family. And then I have directions, and that includes reading the textbook, chapter 9, drawing your kinship chart. And I have a video they can watch, or we could practice it in class first, and then preparing a kinship chart. And then there are also questions that are based on the reading, the textbook reading, and extra readings assigned that day. So I'll talk about how I structure those questions that I ask students, because I think the structure of the question, the content of the question you ask them, is especially important to making a good CPA. So what is my primary goal in designing a good CPA? Asking an authentic question. So when students make a kinship chart, they are creating something original. Nobody's kinship chart looks like anybody else's. And so that's authentic. And it's also allowing them to practice a specific skill in anthropology, understanding how people in our society construct kinship, and then we compare that to the reading. But then there are questions on the reading. And so those are a little trickier to design. I steal some text from David Yamani, who did a lot of great research on using CPAs. So he says, authentic questions have no pre-specified answer, allowing students to offer opinions, points of view, or information that the teacher did not previously know. An authentic question has an indeterminate number of right or acceptable answers. Authentic questions promote substantive engagement in an exercise and provide a stronger foundation for in-class discussion than a series of inauthentic or test questions. And I love this statement from him, that I may learn something from them in the process is an inherent benefit of this design. So CPAs work really well for anthropology because we have this kind of open content. I don't know that I could ask a math professor to design a CPA that asks an authentic question in this way, but I'm sure it's been done. Medical schools also use CPAs to encourage students to prepare before practicing. And I think so much of that comes from like the kinship chart, where you learn the concept first and then you apply it in the classroom setting. So that's where the authenticity comes in there as well. So how do I use CPAs in our traditional face-to-face classrooms? I give students the CPA before class, and then they answer it. I do it on a weekly basis, so they will be reading and preparing for one CPA each week. They upload their CPA to Blackboard before it's due that day in class. I used to have students bring paper copies, but I grew tired of answering the question where our printer is located. So instead I asked them to bring their phone or their computer so that they can look at it if they need to look at it. So I encourage the use of laptops and phones as a reference for what they already know. Like, this is what I wrote in my CPA. I somehow already forgot this by the time it's class, but I can go back and look at it. And some of them will print it out, but most just use their laptop or their phone or their tablet. Then they do small group discussion. So I always try to get an active learning classroom like this one here, where students can sit in groups to talk to each other, because if it doesn't work unless they can really have intimate conversations with each other where they can actually hear each other. Then the groups will return to a larger discussion facilitated by me so that everybody knows the right concepts and like what the big takeaways should be. And I intersperse mini lectures throughout. So I might lecture on a trickier concept for 3 to 5 minutes and then return it back to the small groups to discuss the next question. So in online courses, which I had to learn for COVID, I had students upload their CPAs every week to the learning management system, so Blackboard for us. And then I centered discussion boards on the CPA experience. And I didn't do a discussion board every week. I did it every 3 weeks. So then I would ask them to look back at the 3 weeks of learning and then share kind of the bigger takeaways, like what they found most intriguing, kind of broader questions to share with their classmates what they're learning in the class. And then I would read through the responses and look for themes and respond to students to keep them engaged. I have recorded lectures that reference the CPA uploaded to Blackboard, and those are 5 to 10 minutes long. Sometimes they get longer if I wasn't paying attention to the clock, but I tried to keep them 5 to 10 minutes. But those have to be redone. And so that's one of the challenges with this. My CPA questions have changed substantially, and so the recorded lecture needs to change as well. How do I grade them? It's a credit or no credit basis. So they either did it and it's good, or they didn't do it and they need to rewrite it or take a 0. It's 70% of their grade, and I'll show you how that's transformed through time. Jamie will have a very different formulation, and that she struggled with as well, and I struggle with this as well. It's turned in before class. If they didn't come to class, I usually will still give them credit, because with COVID, our attendance policies have become gray. So I'm not sure, but I do check to make sure they completed their CPA when they come to class. When a student's work is unsatisfactory, I give them a 0 in Blackboard and I tell them to rewrite it for full credit. I used to give them until the end of the semester, but now I give them 2 weeks because procrastination has become an issue in a lot of my classes. So these are my different syllabi. So when I first started, the CPAs were 20% of the grade. So not very much. And that actually represented how much work they put into them. So 20% of the grade. Then I went to, and I had exams and a final paper. And that was exhausting. So then I went to having course preparation assignments be 35% of the grade, I think. And then I had 3 exams. But then eventually I got rid of the exams, and the only thing students do in my class are course preparation assignments. attendance participation in a final paper. So I got rid of exams. I'm not sure how I ended up there, but it made sense as I eliminated things. It made less work for me in some ways, because the CPAs require a lot of work, I'll say, on my part. Do they work? For me, absolutely. Can somebody tell me the time? I want to make sure I'm not
146.
46. Okay. So I did surveys with students from 2019 to 2021 to determine the amount of reading students were completing compared to other courses, how much reading they completed for the class, their overall feeling of preparedness for the class, their interest, and whether or not it encouraged them to read more critically. These are just some of the findings. There's only 36 students. This is from one class that I surveyed, but what I found was that 30 out of 36 students said that they completed all or most of the reading this week, which is incredible because I was having 1 of 48 complete the reading. I'm sure it wasn't that bad, but it felt like it that some days. How much time did you spend preparing for class? So 29 out of 36 said they prepared at least 1.5 or more hours. And I can't see my numbers right now, but you know, the majority are spending 1.5 to 3 hours preparing, which is more than they were doing before. The CPA assignment for this week encouraged me to complete the reading. 33 out of 36 somewhat agreed or agreed, and the vast majority agreed. Then I have some qualitative findings because I'm a qualitative anthropologist, and those were under the theme of I had to read, the obvious. My perspective was valued, and I thought critically about the world. So I had to read. This is what students told me about CPAs. I needed to read at least part of it to complete the CPA. It's 4 grades, so doing it correctly and reading all of the chapter is important. The CPA made me at least pick up the book. Without it, I wouldn't have. It made me want to read the reading. And of course, that last one is where I want to get for everybody. It made me want to learn, right? It made me want to read, but I accept that I had to read. My perspective was valued. And this is where I think it reflects asking an authentic question. Now I put never called busy work. Last semester, 2 students told me my CPAs were busy work. So I take that back. So now I'm 2 out of 300 or 500 students have called it busy work. But the fact that they called it busy work makes me reflect on where we are post-COVID. Most of these were right before COVID and during COVID. And so I think last semester, they're just feeling it differently. I feel like my voice matters. They encourage me to ask questions and think critically about my own ideas rather than just trying to enforce my own. And I enjoyed the freedom to express opinions and get responses from the instructor and classmates to offer different perspectives. Theme 3, I thought critically about the world, so it helped me reach outside of myself, beyond simple memorization. That's really important to me. That's why I got rid of exams, because I realized they were just brain dumping for my class. Relating simple definitions to complex phenomena in my own life, it helped me to make connections, applying concepts in original ways. They always had that reflexive side. And it made me actually stop and think about what the true meaning of everything I was reading. So even thinking about the reading and what it means is nice. So the limits are your emotional bandwidth. I ask a lot of authentic questions and I get a lot of authentic answers that I have to respond to. So I can't just give them 50 out of 50. I need to read it because they're disclosing things like, oh, I lost my parent and it reminded me of this concept, or this happened to me. And so if you ask a big question, you get a big answer. My grading load is intolerable. I'm always behind. So I need to figure something else out. Can you grade complete or incomplete? So I have a colleague who recently retired who would never be able to just give full credit for something if it's poorly written or not really well thought out. And so you really have to let go of that. And then do your students own the textbook? Here at EKU, we're lucky they do right now. Prior to this, I would have needed to use open access resources to make sure everybody could complete the course. Okay, so that's the end of my spiel, and I will turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Amanda. One of the reasons that we like to present this together is because we both use CPAs in ways that are both very different from each other and also have some similarities. So we like to be able to kind of present different ways that you can use these in your class. So my discussion today will center around the course that I was teaching, which was BUS 303, Essentials of Organizational Behavior and Human Resource Management. And that is to some degree a higher level survey course. So it's primarily juniors with a few sophomores mixed in. And but the course is very broad, so it's covering a wide array of topics surrounding organizational behavior. And the course that I am using today for this was comprised of 26 junior students with a few senior business students mixed in as well. So the foundation for the version of CPAs that I used was the work of Lynn and J. Robert Gillette, the Gillette brothers, who one of them was actually at University of Kentucky, and I think the other one was, I forget where they were, not at Kentucky. But they did work together on this concept, and they formed it around this idea that they could get students to come to class prepared, but that you had to design things a little bit differently. And that was the sort of ethos that they were operating off of. And so they used CPAs and what they called a definitional grading system, which I'll talk about in a little while. So my CPAs involved a reading assignment and then some informal questions, somewhere between 4 to 6 questions. I did kind of play around with how many I wanted to ask. And these were a mix of both content-based questions and experience-based questions that asked students to be a little bit more creative in their responses. The questions were also designed to serve as a guide for the reading. So I intentionally made the questions, I designed them in such a way that it would help students narrow down the content in their very large textbook that I wanted them to focus on. And then I used the CPAs primarily as a basis for class discussion. My class was structured in such a way that it was almost entirely discussion or activities in the classroom time. And one thing that I sort of had to come to terms with was that by using this model, I knew that they wouldn't be reading everything, and I knew that they would be focusing on the areas that I specifically told them to focus on. And so that was something that I reconciled with and felt okay with, because to me, the alternative is that they would actually read less to nothing, as Amanda had noted. So my idea was it was better for them to at least have been exposed to some of this content rather than none of it. So these were the instructions that I provided along with my CPAs. I asked them to answer the questions thoroughly. I discussed how they were graded, which was also a complete or not complete, basically a pass-fail system. And I graded that based on their ability to show a good faith effort. So because these questions were given out prior to covering the material, what I was really looking for was that they spent time thinking about and grappling with the content, at least reviewing it to some degree, even if they didn't get everything 100% correct. And so I gave them, the first time I did this, I gave them sort of a vague length. And I just said, in general, a paragraph for each question. That's something that I revised in later classes, because I felt like this population did a lot better with more structured guidelines. And then one thing that I really tried to harp on was that I wanted them to give answers in their own words. So I did not want to see copying and pasting from the textbook or from other websites. I wanted to hear their interpretation of what they were reading. So as I went through and looked these over each week, that was feedback that I would give quite frequently, as I would say, you know, is this in your own words? Or how would you say this in your own words? And then we would discuss that in class. So here's a couple examples of some of the questions that I used. So as you can see, I'm not going to read them all to you, but there is a mix of some critical thinking questions. So for instance, the second question asks about some content that I had them review on ethical decision making. And I asked them to reflect on which of the 6 lenses they related to most in their decision making and talk about why. So that hopefully had them think a little bit critically about the 6 different lenses and how those might come into play in their everyday decision making. And then some of the questions were more content-based. So for instance, question number 3, what did the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 do? And this was a fairly simple question. They could go to one specific place in the book and answer that, but at least I knew that they were reading and to some degree exposed to that content and knew what that piece of legislature was about. I did sometimes direct them specifically to areas in the textbook, as you can see in questions 1 and 4. I had them review specific charts or material that was provided. Again, this was along with the idea of using them as a guide for their reading. And one other thing that I did is that I tried to vary the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy that I was using. So some things were more content-based, more understanding and remembering, and then some of them were moving up to those higher levels of analyzing and evaluating. So for instance, question 4, do you believe that social responsibility should be a priority for businesses? Why or why not? That would probably fall in like an analyze category, where they had to actually think about what is social responsibility, how do businesses use it, and what about that could be good or bad, with some evaluate in there maybe too. Next, please. Thank you. So a few other things that I did in the questions and that I found to be valuable tools for the class. Sometimes I would ask them for response to videos that I had them watch. I never like to assign content without having them do something with that content. So if I gave them a video to watch prior to class, I would then ask them to respond or reflect on that video. A lot of the questions would ask them to apply concepts from the book to different situations. You can kind of see that in question 2. The book talked about 5 ways that employees can learn about an organization's culture and gave a number of examples. And so using those examples, I asked them to think about another example that was not in the textbook and apply it in a similar way. Sometimes when I assigned extra readings outside of the textbook, that would allow me to use that in some way so that students weren't just, either ignoring it completely or reading it and then not doing anything with it. So it gave them the opportunity to think about that in the context of some of the other concepts in the class. And then one really cool thing that I liked using CPAs for was for them to prepare for guest speakers that we had in class. So I asked them in advance of a guest speaker to read about this person and submit one question that they wanted to ask the guest speaker during the class presentation. And that was really helpful for them. So then when the speaker opened it up for questions, I could remind them, refer to the questions that you've submitted in your CPAs, and that made them feel more confident to ask questions of the presenter. The way that I structured it, this was a Tuesday, Thursday class, and I made the CPAs due on Tuesday of each week with the idea that they would then use that content in class on Tuesday and Thursday. And again, grading it complete or incomplete, depending on whether they made a good faith effort to answer the question. They had to submit it on time by the due date. And I did, much like Amanda mentioned, ask them to bring a copy to class. I said they could do either paper or electronic. I think most people did electronic, which was fine with me, just so they had it to reference back to as they were using it. And then the way that I structured it first was that in order to get credit for it, they needed to attend and participate in the class. And I'll talk a little bit more about some things that I did actually do differently in a subsequent class in a minute. And then I only had 26 students, so I tried to provide intentional feedback each week on every student's CPA. Now that was usually a sentence. I would, briefly read over it and pick one thing that I thought was interesting, or that I learned about them, or that they did a good job highlighting, or that they didn't quite get, and I would comment on that in Blackboard. If you were using these with a larger class, you wouldn't have to do responses to every student every week. You could rotate, or you could just purely base it on a complete or incomplete grading scale. So again, how did I use these in the class? I use them in a few different ways. I always want to be intentional in what I'm asking students to do. So I was very intentional in making sure that the CPAs were tied into the class, so they didn't feel like that was just extra work or busy work that they had to do. So a few different things that I did. Sometimes I would review question by question and use that as a foundation for discussion. So I may ask one of the students in the class to start out by providing their answer. And then I would use that as a basis for further discussion amongst other students. Or sometimes I would reference it more as a foundation for some deeper thinking and understanding of the material. So I also incorporated a similar concept to what Amanda had mentioned as far as mini lectures. So if there were particularly tricky concepts or concepts that I needed to be sure to reiterate, or that I needed to make sure that they understood, then I might do a little mini lecture on that topic. And I could tie in the CPA to that as well and ask for some of their responses that connected to that topic. And my mini lectures were never more than 15 minutes, again, because I wanted the majority of the class to focus on activities. And I also used the CPAs very heavily as a review for the final. I'm sure that many of you have had the experience where students ask for a study guide. The CPAs can almost be a built-in study guide. So I was able to say, go back, look at these different topics. These topics that I've picked out and selected for your CPAs are going to be the focus points of the final exam. So that gave them sort of an easy study guide that I didn't have to create. Oh, and one more point that I wanted to make about using the CPAs in class before I get to this slide. It was important to me that I give students an opportunity to tell me if they didn't want to share their answers in class. There were a few questions that were asked that maybe asked them to critique an organization or, discuss a situation that they'd encountered. And so I always told them, if you tell me about something and you don't want me to call on you or ask you to share this in class, just make a note of it in your CPA or send me an email separately. And I am happy to not ask you to share that particular answer in class. And I did have a number of students that would take me up on that each term. Okay, ready for the next one. Thank you. So a bit about the definitional grading system. This was what I did the very first time that I used CPAs. And this was heavily based on the grading system used by the Gillette brothers. And their philosophy is that this is a both and grading system, not an either or grading system. So the analogy that they used was athletes have to attend both the practice and the actual game. And then I threw in a business related example in my syllabus and said, successful executives need to focus on both profit and acting ethically. And so in order to complete the class, you needed to successfully pass both your CPAs and your graded assignments or graded papers. And so this was the scale that I put in the syllabus. You could see there was a grade for their graded work, or a column for their graded work, and then a column for their CPAs. So if they did perfectly on all of their graded assignments, but then they only did 5 of their CPAs, that was going to significantly impact their grade. So I'll talk a little bit more about how I've kind of tweaked that system since then and some of the things that I thought worked well and didn't work well with that.
Oh, do you want me to go on?
Oh yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're moving ahead at a perfect pace, so thank you.
Okay.
So these are some of the course evaluations. I did incorporate questions on the class preparation assignments for the course. And as you can see, the majority of respondents did say that class preparations assignments helped them to be better prepared and that they did make them more likely to read assigned material. This was 22 students out of 26, so it was a pretty good representation from the class. Next, yes. A couple comments to pick up on the qualitative, as Amanda did. Students said that the CPAs got them ready for the content that was being discussed. They felt that it helped them to better understand the material that was covered during the class. It helped them learn the concepts and read the textbook. And one thing that I thought was really cool was that one person noted how the CPAs helped them generate new information based on the topics. So it gave them a little more exposure to the topics and then helped them to think about how might you apply them in novel situations? Or in this context, how might you apply them if you were in this sort of setting in a business environment? So I found those to be fairly positive results overall for the use of CPAs. So a few things that I learned in particular, like I mentioned, allowing students to tell you when they don't want to share a response, defining a specific length for an answer, which I did do in the next iteration. I gave them a specific word count that I was looking for. A more traditional grading scale. So what I found with the definitional grading scale is that this was something that was challenging for students to understand. So it was a big departure from what they've encountered in pretty much all of their other classes, I think. And so because of that, I found that I wasn't comfortable sticking directly to the definitional grading system. First of all, if they had done phenomenally on their graded work, I didn't want to then give them a D in the class because they hadn't done their, CPAs. So what I ended up doing was kind of reverting back to a more traditional system where, they were deducted a certain amount of points for each CPA that they hadn't done. And then when I did this for the second go around, I actually made it a much more traditional system where, much like Amanda had said, the CPAs were worth a high percentage of the grade. I think it wasn't 70, I forget exactly what it was, but it was at least half of the grade for CPAs. Originally, I had said that to get credit for the CPAs, you had to come to class. But what I found was that it was a really useful tool for when students had to be out. And again, this, was sort of in the aftermath of COVID. So there was that kind of grayness in attendance and a lot of flexibility that I wanted to extend to our students. So I was able to say, okay, thank you for letting me know that you're going to be out. Please be sure that you go through the class preparation assignments and answer them each week. So I knew that even if they weren't in class, they were getting some exposure to the weekly content. And we can send out this slideshow, but I also included a link to an article that provides some ideas for using CPAs in classroom settings.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, so this is actually sort of a new thing that we've added that we felt was necessary to talk about a little bit. And that's how artificial intelligence and programs like ChatGPT may affect CPA use. So Amanda, did you want to start with that?
Yes. I'm still getting used to AI. My familiarity is that my friend wrote a sitcom with his wife as the star using AI. And I thought, oh, wow. Can somebody write an ethnographic observation using AI? How cool and how concerning. So I haven't really seen it in class yet. There are answers students write where I know it's not their own work because it doesn't come from the text and it could never have come from their brain. But I'm not sure how we just discuss it. So this semester I prefaced our class with, if you use AI on your CPA, just let me know because I want to, I'll give you full credit. I just want to see how it operates. And so I'm being open to it, but most of the students looked at me like I was an alien. They hadn't used AI yet for anything. And two, they were amazed I was encouraging them to cheat in air quotes, right? So we'll see where we get at the end of this semester. Because I think Jamie has some better ideas about how to productively use AI. And because what concerned me was that our students were really uncomfortable with using it. And it seems like this is part of our new reality. And so they need to understand it. So Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you on that note.
Yeah, I don't know if better, but maybe some additional ideas. So I think that certainly there's some concerns and can be concerns around the use of AI and to what degree students are relying on some of these programs when responding to course preparation assignments. So I think that's one thing for any instructor to reflect on is, how comfortable are you with your students obtaining some of this material or getting a foundation to respond to some of this material from, ChatGPT or a system like that. So I personally, I did incorporate in my class a statement that said, answers should be your own. I didn't want them to copy and paste what was spit out of ChatGPT into a CPA answer. But I was okay if they used it as a foundation for getting ideas and for responding to this. I also tried to vary the questions so that some of the questions were more reflective and, in theory, required them to think about personal experiences, to think about personal preferences, things that AI probably wouldn't be able to tell you, or that it would be even more challenging to actually get an answer from AI than to just write down your own personal experience with this. I think Amanda's right. It's something that's out there. And I think that in a lot of ways, it can be beneficial for our students. So one thing I actually did, which tied into the topic that I was teaching in business, is that I actually created a CPA question around AI. So I directed them to use AI in one of the questions, and I said, go to this program, and I gave them a topic or a question to research. And it was a decision-making type question. So I said, how can you use this technology to help in business decision-making going forward? And so I asked them to reflect on some topics using AI as a basis for their response to this CPA. So I think that that's probably the future of where a lot of this is going. I think that as instructors, it will be on us more and more frequently to find acceptable ways to incorporate artificial intelligence, because I don't think it's going away, and I think it will continue to be even more sophisticated. And I will never be somebody who runs on the hamster wheel of trying to catch students that are using AI. People may think differently about that, but that is never something that I will do. So I'm trying to think of creative ways going forward that we can incorporate this and have them use CPAs possibly with the assistance of AI, but in a productive way that actually fosters learning.
Thanks. Do we have a next slide? Let's see. These are our references. And there is not that much research on CPAs within undergraduate settings like our own. So if you're looking for an article to write, there's a lot of room for growth. So I think we'll end there and ask questions. So thank you all for coming. Does anybody have questions? Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily a question. First of all, thank you and Jamie for your presentations. But one of the things I really liked about yours, Dr. Green, but also Jamie touched on this too, was this establishing a relevance to a CPA that you want your students to think about. Not just some cut and dried question based on a book or an article, making it relevant to the student. So I really like that. Also, there is some emphasis on group work in your presentation, Dr. Green, starting with small groups and then opening it up to a larger discussion. This is the same kind of thing that we use in English as second language to develop skills and confidence in speaking. Students who may be shy or introverted, who are reluctant to speak in an entire open class, are much more likely to speak in a smaller group. So I liked your emphasis on those two things, as well as the emphasis on critical thinking, which is what we're here to do, to foster. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and for me, the relevance is part of the AI. Like, it's got to be a question that they want to answer if they're not going to look elsewhere for somebody else, a computer to answer it for them. So I think that's part of relevance too, but it also serves a purpose.
I think I really like the idea of allowing the students to express their opinion. And this opinion may be completely different from yours, contradictory from yours, but creating an environment where they're allowed to think freely and express freely, as long as it is within certain parameters. Yeah, so great strategy. Thank you both, you and Jamie.
Yeah, and just to follow up a little bit on Dr. Sultana's comment, you know, I did experience that frequently. For instance, that question on, you know, to what degree should a business focus on social responsibility? That was actually something that started a pretty good debate or discussion in our class, because, you know, most people responded and had said, you know, yeah, they definitely should focus on social responsibility, and they, you know, have a obligation to the community. But we also had some students who challenged that and had a different opinion, said, you know, no, I think that, you know, a business's first priority is going to be surviving financially and the bottom line, and then the social responsibility may come later. And so that was a good discussion that was based on some differing opinions that students held.
You have your references available to give out.
Yes, so we have the slideshow, and then I have handouts from a workshop outside of EKU that I am very happy to share that can link to all the research done. And then like easier how-to manuals that are more straightforward.
And I will put my email in the chat, and somebody can probably write it up there. But if anybody has any questions for me, please feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy. I saw that Lori Larkin is thinking about using these in class, which is awesome. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have as you're thinking about how you want to use these. And I'm sure Amanda's the same way as well.
Yes, but very different fields. And I think it can be helpful to talk with people in your own field to think about how best to use these. Yeah, thank you. We don't have any more questions. Can wrap up, and Jamie, if you want to stay, you can stay, and we can keep talking to you too.
Thank you all. I just want to say thanks